You're listening to Lexington Community Radio, WLXU 93.9, and this is Bike Talk.
Bluegrass Cycling Club is proud to support Bike Talk as an underwriter for Lexington Community Radio. For more information, you may visit bgcycling.net. I'm your host, Wanda Bertram. Today we're talking about a new law in Kentucky regarding bicycles. This law requires cars to give bicycles a 3-foot clearance when passing them on roadways. With me to talk about this law is citizen advocate Dixie Moore. Hey Dixie, welcome to the show again.
Well, so glad to be here and so glad to be talking about the law that has gotten passed.
It has finally gotten passed. You have been working on this for how many years now?
3 years. Senator Robin Webb introduced it in 2016, and then it's been in 2017, and it finally got passed in 2018 with Representative Jerry Miller from Louisville sponsoring it.
And Dixie, just so that people know a little bit about why you're on the show, can you talk about your role as a citizen advocate, what that means and what you have done, the work that you have done the last 3 years?
Okay, well, thank you. I'm a cyclist. I'm a recreational cyclist, and about 3.5 years ago, I was riding, and I saw a sign on someone's bumper that said, "Give 3 feet to cyclists." And I have had my share of close calls where a mirror has almost hit my head and vehicles coming too close. And I said, hey, maybe that's a law in Kentucky. And I started to look up, and it wasn't. So that made me to have the idea that maybe Kentucky could pass this law, since at that time, something like 35 other states had passed it. And so I figured there was enough example out there that Kentucky could fall in line. So I went down and I met with Senator Webb, and we discussed how to do it, and she said, well, you just can ask people to support it, and I'll put it in the legislature, and we'll see where we go. And so I went down to Frankfort, and I said, well, am I a lobbyist? And it was explained to me that since I'm not getting paid, I'm what is considered a citizen advocate. So all this was my contribution to cycling in Kentucky. So for 3 years, I went down to Frankfort, but more important than going down to Frankfort was mobilizing cyclists through social media, through Facebook, through their sites where they, advertise their rides or give latest updates on when they're going to be out on the road, and getting people to call their legislature. I probably have the Kentucky legislative number memorized, okay? But we don't have to call these days because it's been passed. But it was due to the support of many people that this got passed.
So lots of people got behind it over the course of 3 years. Now we have a law, so the question is, what's next? But first, let's talk about what is actually in this new law.
In the new law, it says that you are to, if you're a passing vehicle, so that's a car, a truck, a tractor, anything, move to the left lane going in the same direction to pass. Now, if there is not a lane there, then you're to give a minimum of 3 feet. In order to get this law passed in Kentucky, there was some opposition from rural counties who said, we've got so many narrow roads and we've got big machinery, and if we do this, we're going to be in the curb, or we're going to be waiting a long, long time to get around you. So there is a slight exception into the law in that if space on the roadway is not available, then to use reasonable caution. And reasonable caution is how the law read prior to this law. So a roadway is measured from the side of the pavement, not from the white line, from the side of the pavement to the other side of the pavement. So this means that on a road, a country road that might be 10 to 12 feet, a car probably has enough room to give 3 feet and stay on the pavement. A large tractor, farm machinery probably does not. And so they're to use reasonable caution, which hopefully means that the cyclist will see them coming and pull over, because if they're that big that they can't give 3 feet, they're probably pretty big and slow.
They would have a hard time passing another car anyway.
They couldn't.
Yes.
They couldn't. Mm-hmm.
So bicycles have 3 feet or reasonable caution.
Yes. And looking at the statistics, most of the bicycle vehicle collisions are in urban areas. So I felt comfortable making this exception. Like 3/4 of them are in urban areas. And urban roads are definitely wide enough to give 3 feet. But there are some other parts of the law which I think are very good, both for cyclists and the motorists. This law makes things safer for both, and making it safer for both is really making it safer for both, not just cyclists. One of them is that you can cross a yellow line. If you are a vehicle, you can cross a double yellow line. You can cross in a no passing zone in order to pass a bicycle.
And before, that wasn't legal.
Correct. It was often done as a cyclist, I can say that, but it was not legal. And that exception to how we consider double yellow lines is already in several states, something like 12 or 13, I think. And the reasoning behind it is that the no passing zones were meant to keep cars from passing other vehicles that were large and that you couldn't see around. And also the assumption was that the car that you were passing was going the legal speed limit, i.e. 55 miles per hour, we'll say. A bike usually goes about 13 to 15. Sometimes on a hill I'm doing 9, So there is less speed to the bike, there is better visibility. In many cases, it can be safe if there's no oncoming traffic, and that's stipulated in the law, to go ahead and pass on a yellow line.
So this really gives operators of motor vehicles better instruction and guidance for how to behave and operate around bicycles.
Correct.
So it's much clearer.
Correct.
And this law, from what I understand, interacts very well with other laws already existing on how to operate around bicycles.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about what some of those other laws are?
Yes. A bicycle is considered a vehicle. So we are to follow all the basic rules of the road as any other vehicle. In other words, we're supposed to stop at stop signs, we're supposed to give signals, we're supposed to follow the rules of the road. If there's a hazard and they say don't go, we're not supposed to go. Laws that are specific to bicycles are that we are to stay as far to the right as practicable. That's the wording in the law, as practicable. What this means is that generally we should be in the right tire tread of a car that is in that lane. That is what is considered practicable. That gives us about 3 to 4 feet from the white line on the right side of the road. But however, there are often hazards. There's often parked cars, debris. And so we have to move out into the lane at times, particularly if we're going to do a left-hand turn. It would be, I would be taking my life and somebody else's life in my hands if I was trying to do a left-hand turn from furthest on the right. There has to be some give and leeway here.
So cyclists, as we know, have the right to be on the roadway, but we also have responsibilities when we are interacting with auto vehicles as well.
Right. We are considered a, quote, slow-moving vehicle, like a farm tractor or some piece of heavy machinery that can't go very fast. And as a slow-moving vehicle, we're to stay as close to the right as practicable, and also, quote, not to impede the normal flow of traffic. Now, we can have a whole session on what is the normal flow of traffic.
So, to me, I know I've stopped. When I've been stopped cycling vehicles, very courteous drivers have rolled down their window and asked me, how do I pass you? What's safe? How far away should I be? I can answer them now.
Yeah, a minimum of 3 feet. The faster the car is going, the further the distance should be, because a car has draft. So a large vehicle can suck the cyclist toward them. And this is a real danger.
Yes. So the faster a car is going, the farther they should be. So even give more than 3 feet.
Correct.
If they can. All right, well, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a few moments to talk about this new law and its implications and why it's necessary. So stay tuned in. Welcome back to Bike Talk on Lexington Community Radio. I'm your host, Wanda Bertram. Today we're talking about a new law in Kentucky regarding bicycles, and this law requires cars to give bicycles a 3-foot clearance when passing on roadways. And with me to talk about this law is Dixie Moore. She's the citizen advocate who was greatly responsible for getting this law passed. In our first segment, we talked about the law and why it's necessary, particularly from a safety standpoint, Dixie, right?
Correct.
And you have data to back
Yes.
up.
Looking at the Kentucky bicycle fatalities by the year, and this is from the Kentucky Office of Highway Safety. In 2015, there were 7 deaths. 2016, 7 deaths. In 2018, 17 again. I think I got my numbers confused. It's between 6 and 7 deaths in the last 3 years. And we're at 2 already this year. And I would like to think that we aren't going to get up to 6 and 7 again because of the informal effect of talking about this law. But we'll have to wait and see, because most of the accidents that occur happen in the summer. But prior to 2015, we were down around about 3 or 4, maybe 5. So what we've seen over the last 3 years has been an increase in bicycle fatalities in Kentucky. To look at it nationally, bicycle fatalities of all traffic fatalities is 2%, but bicyclists are only 1% of all people who are on the road. So we've got more bicycle fatalities per our small number than cars do.
So we
And
have
this
lots
is
of room
alarming.
to improve. Yes, it is alarming.
Because it is seen as unsafe, and many people will tell me, I don't ride a bike because I think it's unsafe on the road. This impacts both the use of cycling as an alternative transportation that has less environmental impact, also very affordable for people who might not want to spend money on a car or don't have the money to spend on a car. But also it impacts tourism, because Kentucky is a very beautiful state, and there are many events during the summer where cyclists come to Kentucky to bike, or they just might come on their own. And this makes Kentucky a more attractive destination for cycling, which is important, particularly in some of our more rural and mountainous areas that have been hard hit by decline in other.
Where tourism could have a very positive impact. Another reason for this legislation is that it will help impact our national rating for cycling safety.
Right, and that. Yes. About 2 years ago, we were like 49th, okay?
Oh, we've got to do better.
And maybe 10 to 15 years ago, we were about 27th. So other people moved ahead, other states moved ahead, and Kentucky did not. And if I'm going to choose to go somewhere to ride, I will look at these statistics, or I'll have them in the back of my head, and I say, is this a safe place to ride? So that is important.
Right, and more cyclists are coming onto the road. You're seeing those numbers expand. We have to make the roads safer.
Correct.
And this is one way to do it. As the law was under discussion as a bill over the last 3 years, a lot of topics came up too that were related, that have to do with cycling. And there was a lot of discussion in the Senate and House committees. One of those issues was the daytime use of headlights. Can you talk a little bit about that discussion, and what were some of the things that came up that we would want to know about?
Oh, right. Well, it was brought up by Senator Harris in the Senate, the last Senate meeting, and he asked me, well, do you use daytime lights? And I said, yes. Well, shouldn't it be a law? It sort of stumped me. Why would something that I think is important for me to use, I would not think that it should be in the law? Well, the current law already states that you're to have a light if it's nighttime. The law is very circuitous, sort of, and it talks about you need front and bike lights visible for 500 feet, 1/2 hour after sunset and 1/2 hour before sunrise, and under similarly low visibility conditions. All that means is that you're supposed to have lights on when it's dark. And those conditions are met on a country road with lots of trees overhanging, because you cannot see. That's like dusk. It would be like
Yes.
dusk to us. So we already have a law in place. Unfortunately, that is frequently not followed. So we need more knowledge of the law and more enforcement of that particular law.
So a lot of education.
Right,
even.
right. But to require daytime lights in the middle of the day basically shifts the responsibility from the motorist to the cyclist. And there are many other ways that the cyclist can be visible. High visibility clothing. You can use a light if you really just feel like you want to. High visibility socks. There are many ways to be visible other than a light at noon. Also, the batteries for lights on bicycles only run for about an hour, maybe 2 hours at the most.
That's right.
You're penalizing people who want to ride a lot because they won't have enough battery power to light a bike all the time, 24/7.
Well, and you think about, we go back to economic impact, that a lot of people who live at the poverty line or below the poverty line, that's a pretty big expense to get
Yes.
daytime lights for your bike.
Correct.
As well.
The people who usually do the daytime, who usually make sure that they have lights on their bikes, are the commuters, which often ride at dark. And so, they're already responsible, according to the law, to have lights on at that time. But then the road cyclists who are riding fast out on roads where people don't expect them, those people are starting to use daytime lights.
Well, and Kentucky does have the most proactive lighting requirements for bicycles in the country. So
Correct.
walked away feeling pretty good about our existing laws
Yes.
for lights on bicycles.
Yes. In about 2016, they spent about 5 years, the Kentucky Bikeway Commission, drafting our basic bike laws. The 3-foot law, because it pertains to the behavior of a motorist, has to be in another section. But our whole bike laws got revamped about 3 years ago.
Well, another point that was brought up in discussion as the bill was making its way into being law was the pro and cons of riding side by side, of two cyclists riding abreast on the roadways. There's a lot of discussion about that, Dixie.
Yes, it is legal to ride two abreast or side by side. The statistics from national surveys are that there are many less, perhaps none, fatalities when bikes ride two by two, or side by side.
So it's actually safer
It's safer.
to ride side by side.
Now, the perception for a driver in a vehicle is that, hey, they're hogging the road. They're blocking my way. But sometimes it's safer to ride 2x2 because I, as a cyclist, can see further than the car behind me. And if I know it's dangerous to pass, I can pull out and ride side by side or pull over to the left side of the lane. And that way basically signals you that it's dangerous. So that's important. But many people do not realize that I am not as visible on the right side of the road as I am toward the middle or toward the left.
And when you see that it is safe for someone to pass you, if there is a car behind you and you know that it is safe for them to pass, single up
Yes.
at that time and give them more of the road.
Yes.
So there was a lot of debate about that, which was a very, very interesting discussion about going single file, the differences between the two, which led to some discussion about the perceptions of cyclists on the road and how they behave on the road as well.
Oh, I think the perception from motorists is that we ride in these large packs and we have no consideration for anyone else on the road, and we're basically just thumbing our nose at the cars. However, group rides are a very small percentage of the amount of riding that is done. Most riding is, single or a few people, riding together. Commuting traffic obviously does not go in large packs, but that is a perception that needs to change. And I belong to the Bluegrass Cycling Club, and I know that the ride leaders are being instructed to break up large rides into smaller groups so that cars can pass and we don't choke the roads. So this is important to do.
Yeah, so cyclists should always be considerate of cars that are behind them. If there are 2, 3, 4 cars, if cars start piling up, pull over, get off the road, let people get by.
Once a year, the Bluegrass Cycling Club has a very large bicycle event, the Horsey 100, over the Memorial Day weekend. And we've started to do radio announcements that we're going to be out on the road. In other words, 2,000 cyclists are going to be on the road. But that's a one-time event in the year. And we have police at certain intersections to help cyclists cross safely. So that is, sometimes what you remember is what's different, not what's common.
Yes, and one thing that I've heard you say that I really like is ride as if your mother were behind you.
Yes.
All right, we're going to take another break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Bike Talk on Lexington Community Radio. I'm your host, Wanda Bertram. Today we're talking about a new law in Kentucky that regards bicycles, and it requires cars to give bicycles a 3-foot clearance when they pass on the roadways. Dixie Moore is here to talk about this law. She's the citizen advocate that was greatly responsible for this bill getting passed in the last legislative session. Dixie, can you talk a little bit about this new law and our existing cycling infrastructure?
One comment that I want to make before I go into infrastructure is that during the 3 years that I advocated for this bill, other organizations and agencies came on. The YMCA was a major supporter of this bill because they see it as being safer for children or kids or young people who ride to their activities. And then the environmental groups also were strongly supportive of it because anything that reduces pollution is a good thing and increases exercise.
Absolutely.
We have in Kentucky something on the road that are called sharrows. These are the signs, the painted signs of the bicycles, and these have only started to come out in the last maybe 5-6 years. And the law indicates that if signage indicates otherwise, a cyclist does not have to stay as practicable to the right as would otherwise. In other words, that bike symbol allows us, as we would say, to take the lane if needed. In other words, it forewarns people that we are there and that if they want to pass us, they need to do 3 feet and we aren't being in their way if we're out a little bit further. Because, we've got grills in cities, we've got drains, sometimes it is just basically unsafe to ride as far to the right as practicable.
So if there is a sharrow in the road, then the cyclist may have full use of the road.
Correct. And a sharrow stands for share arrow. Okay, a
Cute.
combined
Yeah.
word. And typically they're used on roads that would get a bike lane, but are too narrow for a bike lane. A couple of weeks after the bill was passed, I got a phone call, and I really didn't know how to answer it, and so I checked it out with Troy Hearn, who's the bike ped coordinator for Kentucky, to talk about how this law would interact with bike lanes. And since the law states to give 3 feet if there is enough room on the pavement on the roadway, then you're supposed to do it. So this means that I could be in my bike lane, maybe even riding close to the left side of the bike lane, and there's a car over in their lane riding real close to the right side of their lane, which means he's very close to me because we've only got a little white line between us. The law states that he still has to give me 3 feet. Even though I'm in my bike lane and he's in his lane, he still needs to give, or she needs to give 3 feet.
So that greatly depends on where you are riding in the bike lane. From the point of the bike to the car, regardless if there's a bike lane or not, you still get 3 feet.
Correct.
Because there could be debris, there could be obstacles in the bike lane as well.
True. And this gets to, where do you measure the 3 feet? You measure the 3 feet from the furthest point of the bike and the furthest point of the vehicle. So for a bicycle, this means generally 3 feet from the end of the handlebar. For a vehicle, this could be 3 feet from the very large wide-angle mirror sticking out from a pickup truck or a large transport truck. And that is a particularly dangerous scenario for a cyclist because that mirror oftentimes is at the same height as your head. And so definitely I want that mirror 3 feet from my head.
Vehicle, a driver, as they're thinking about this 3-foot law, it's the farthest point of their car. Often that's the mirror.
Correct.
Not necessarily, but it's usually the mirror. Can you talk about doors as well? Because one unexpected safety hazard is often a car door.
Yes, it's what's called dooring. So you're riding along where you're supposed to be on the right side of the road or in a bike lane, and somebody opens the door, and then they basically knock you over. So if I'm a cyclist, I got to keep watching those heads in the car to try to anticipate what they're going to do, or else ride slow enough that I can stop if a door suddenly opens, which is very, very, very slow. So this is an issue. This is a problem. What they're trying to do in Europe is to train, better word, educate, to get people to open their door by crossing their right hand over their body, which forces them to look back to see if anyone's there.
Let's change the subject just a little bit and talk about implementing this law. There's two aspects of implementation: enforcement and education. And there was a great deal of discussion about those two aspects of well when it was on the floor of the committee.
Right. Generally, I was asked, well, how are you going to enforce this? And technically, there are ways that you could do it. You know, there are gadgets you can mount on a bike that indicate when you're within 3 feet of them, some sort of laser setup. Where the law is in KRS, the Kentucky Regulation Statutes, part of the law that refers to another section called penalty. So technically there could be a very small penalty attached to this if somebody stopped you and, quote, gave you a ticket. However, nobody is set up to give tickets. I think the most that people are expecting people will do is warnings. The force of this law is in education and in setting a standard. It's very much like laws around texting or around seatbelts. When the seatbelt laws were first introduced, there was no way to, quote, enforce them. You had to be stopped for some other violation, and then if you weren't wearing your seatbelt, maybe you might get ticketed. But there was no cop standing at the corner telling people to put on their seatbelts. But over time, we now put on our seatbelts. And we hope that this law will follow a similar trajectory, that it'll become second nature to give 3 feet. So that is how we see this law working. And so it's real important to get the word out. And this is one reason why I'm talking to you, Wanda. There'll be other spots across the state. I've already seen on social media that someone had posted a brief article in Western Kentucky. And hopefully there'll be more press releases and there'll be more information getting out. Also, there are some regular ways to get the word out. Revise the bicycling section of the driver's manual, which obviously will happen because this is a change in law. The way the section on bicycles reads in the driver's manual, which is near the end of the manual, maybe about 3 pages, is that it's good practice to give 3 feet. Now the driver's manual can say it can be a law. It is a law. And just like if you're stopped and you don't have your seatbelt on, that might impact your insurance rates later on. This might impact your insurance rates later on. If perhaps you have a wreck with a bicyclist and people say that you weren't giving 3 feet, then that might cause some more long-range repercussion. I don't know how it will play out, but that typically is how these laws work. If you don't follow them, at some point when someone looks at your behavior, it can become detrimental to you if you don't follow them. Another way is to require mandatory bicycle or pedestrian questions on the driver's exam. So
Good
hey, you got to
point.
read that section. Share the road training for state employees. People who get a commercial driver's license have tests on their exams pertaining to cyclists. We would really like that.
Well, because we mentioned that larger vehicles and faster moving vehicles need to give even more clearance.
Right, because of the
if
draft.
they can.
And then when you have a diversion program where traffic offenders have to go to get sort of a refresher course, give information then on the rights and responsibilities of motorists and cyclists. What I would love would be to put a 3-foot minimum little logo on a driver's license plate.
What about highway signs? Well, might we at some point see highway signs? Because we see the signs with the bicycles that alert drivers that these are roads that you will often interact with bicycles, having a sign that says motorists give minimum 3 feet.
Other states do that. I sort of floated that idea and I sort of got, well, let's wait and see. But I think that definitely could be a possibility. It could be very easily, I think, with new share the road signs, the, bicycle caution sign on the road. I think it could very easily be integrated into that sign.
And Dixie, what can communities do to help educate and set up the 3-foot clearance infrastructure and education in their own communities? There's grants out there.
Right. There's something called the Paula Nye Grants, which the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission gives out every year. It was in honor of a very nice lady who died several years ago who worked in the bike ped field. You can apply for those grants to do public announcements, public awareness campaigns pertaining to this law.
Well, we're going to take another short break, and we'll be back with you in a few moments with Dixie Moore. Welcome back to Bike Talk on Lexington Community Radio. I'm your host, Wanda Bertram. Today we're talking about a new law in Kentucky regarding bicycles requiring cars to give a 3-foot clearance whenever they pass bikes on roadways. And with me talking about this law and its impact is citizen advocate Dixie Moore. And Dixie, this has been a huge hurdle that you've overcome to get this new law into place. We've talked about how it can be enacted, about education. But looking forward, what are some future legislative opportunities and challenges that we face as a state?
Okay. Well, thank you, Wanda. It's to give a minimum of 3 feet.
A minimum of 3 feet.
Okay. But given that, while I was advocating for the bill and thinking about how best to present it, I realized that there were some natural allies. We have a fair amount of horse traffic in Kentucky.
Yes, we certainly do.
Other states have what are called vulnerable user laws. In other words, this type of law could be expanded to horses, pedestrians, mopeds, motorcycles, scooter, inline skates, or motorized mobility devices.
That's a very good point.
I.e., a motorized wheelchair. So they're all considered vulnerable users who can be on our roads. And I just thought it was too overwhelming to try to get that many stakeholders together on, basically volunteer work of one person. So I just stuck with the bicycle. But I think this law will be expanded, I imagine, in the future to other vulnerable users.
It sets a very good precedent for that to happen, for these the activist groups to use this law to say, hey, we're vulnerable too in that same situation.
Correct. And there's something else coming down the pike in terms of bicycles, are electric bikes. And with an electric bike, I don't have to be as strong, but I can still do a good 15 miles an hour on an electric bike. So I think when electric bikes get adopted, particularly in our urban areas where they would be great for commuters or people doing everyday errands, that there's going to be an increase in cycling. And so this law will be pertaining to them, but also electric bikes might bring their own situations. One, you're going to have to specify what is an electric bike. Mm-hmm. How fast can an electric bike go and still be considered a bicycle as opposed to something more akin to a moped?
A motorized vehicle.
Correct. And then, as much as I hate to mention it because I don't want to give people ideas, in other states, sometimes there are fees or taxes on bicycles for bicycles to use the roads or on certain types of roads. And this might be something that, as a cyclist, we might want to look at very closely and consider, would something like this work in our behalf are not in our behalf. And would it work for the overall transportation, or would it unjustly penalize?
So
Some.
really look at the pros and cons for all of the users of the road.
Correct. And then we come to helmet laws. I ride a helmet when I ride. I had an accident recently where a helmet probably saved me from some serious injury. However, that was not on a road, it was on a driveway. But a lot of people say you should wear a helmet, that it makes it safer for you, and it does. However, Europe has taken the other tact, and they do not require helmets, and they're saying that, looking at it in the big picture, that the amount of exercise that people get by cycling when there is good infrastructure overcompensates for the occasional head injury that a helmet would prevent.
So they're saying with better infrastructure, which many European countries have compared to our infrastructure, that negates the need for a helmet.
Yes, and when I say better infrastructure, they typically have cycle paths, bike lanes that are totally separated from cars. So you only wear the helmet for your own protection, like I in my driveway when I made a stupid maneuver and I fell over. You don't use the helmet to protect you from cars because you ride separate from cars.
From cars. So a very different situation.
Yes. But that might be something that comes up. And then there are going to be laws perhaps on dooring. People who, without looking, open their door into a bike lane, and on harassment of cyclists. I've had an occasional, bottle thrown at me. I've had, what do they call it, blowing coal, I think, or when a pickup truck that's diesel goes by and, does a blast of exhaust.
Intentionally blasts for no other reason but to harass the cyclist.
Yes. People who come too close to you. And then also the idea of that people might still want to require lights on bikes, or in the past there have been the requests for flags on bikes. But in a more serious vein, there's something called the Idaho, or to me more serious, what's called an Idaho a rolling stop, which allows cyclists to treat a stop sign as a yield sign and a red light as a stop sign. We are very light. We cannot trip the machinery or the sensors that causes the red light to flash to green.
Correct.
We can sit there a long time. So this is a law that would allow us, after we go through a cycle, to then proceed if the way is clear.
And that's called an Idaho or a rolling stop.
Correct. There's three situations there. One, to treat a stop sign as a yield sign, and then a red light as a stop sign.
And so all of these examples that you have given about legislative opportunities and challenges are incidents that have come up in other states.
Yes.
Of course, some of these have come up in our state. And you mentioned that there are many vulnerable users of the road, which many of these issues pertain to. But the cycling and ped community, I think in particular, is at a disadvantage in our state because we lack something very important.
Yes, we lack a statewide group that speaks for cycling or that speaks for cycling and pedestrians. The Kentucky Bicycle and Bikeway Commission is part of the Transportation Cabinet, and they really work, I really congratulate them over the last several years because they did rework they gave us some bicycle laws, which are very good. But that agency or that commission is appointed by the governor, and so it doesn't necessarily reflect all cyclists.
It's not an independent
It's not
entity.
independent. Thank you very much. Yes. That's one reason why I could use the advocacy of the network or clubs. I sort of was acting as a one-person advocacy group. It was fun. I did it for 3 years, but it's more than a volunteer position. It needs to be supported by people, and there are other, as I just mentioned, there are other topics to be considered. So I highly support a statewide biking advocacy organization.
So it needs to be not just a person out working and creating that connectivity for one occasion. It needs to be an ongoing system.
Correct. Yes. And several years ago, there was a push to do that. Something called Kentucky Pedal was organized at the state level. There was not enough energy behind it, and so it fizzled. And hopefully it will be resurrected, maybe under the same name, under a different name. And there's something coming up in August called the Bike Summit.
Yes, the Kentucky Bike Walk Summit. It's
Yes.
on August 16th and 17th.
Right.
And people can go to kybikewalksummit.com if they want more information on that and want to register for that, because that's going to be one of the topics of the Bike Summit.
Yes, and what people, cycling advocates, are hoping, and pedestrian advocates, is that out of that will be a nucleus that can resurrect a nonprofit advocacy organization. You can get registered at the state very easily, but you need to be registered at the federal level in order to receive tax-free contributions, and that could then be used for education. You can't use tax-free contributions for advocacy, but you certainly can use them for education. And I think that would be the first way that an organization would try to go, would be registered as a nonprofit at the federal level.
Dixie, let's close by talking a little bit about the 3-foot law specifically. It had some broad goals. Can you talk about it in that broad sense? What does it do for our state?
One, it provides a standard so that people will not sideswipe bicycles, not overreact. By giving that minimum 3-foot standard, we hope to reduce the number of accidents and fatalities. And I follow the fatalities figures put out by the Kentucky Highway Safety Program, and I'm going to be very curious to look at them over the next couple of years to see if they do drop. It gives a legal framework to protect cyclists who are hit from behind, because this is generally one of the common accidents that happen between a motorist and a bicycle. Basically, obviously you're too close because you hit the cyclist. Mm-hmm. And is that going to be taken in consideration in a lawsuit? Kentucky basically has a no-fault law out on the road. If I hit somebody, nobody, unless I'm drunk or some extraordinary circumstance, is going to charge me for hitting that person, either if I'm in a car or on a bike. But your insurance company will be sued for damages, and this is where the law can have an impact. Because if the people who determine these things say that you did not give 3 feet, then possibly it's going to increase your insurance payout.
It creates a less arbitrary standard,
right?
Which is very important.
It takes the word reasonable out for many situations and puts in minimum of 3 feet.
I think very importantly, it raises the awareness of the importance of passing safely. That's the real purpose.
Yes.
Well, Dixie, that's all the time we have for today's show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate you doing this. Thank you very much.
Well, you've done fabulous work getting this passed into law. Don't forget to tune in to Bike Talk at the same time next week for all things cycling, helping you get out, explore our towns and countryside in Lexington and beyond. Thanks for joining us. Be safe and enjoy the ride. Bluegrass Cycling Club is proud to support Bike Talk as an underwriter for Lexington Community Radio. For more information, you may visit bgcycling.net.